Our speaker today is Sommerville. Her daddy was a B-17 pilot flying out of Italy in the 15th Air Force.
Wow.
We ate in the same mess hall. He was in the bomb group right next to me, didn't know him, he was an officer. They sat to the left over here, and the list of men were, we sat on picnic tables. And he was there in the 353rd, is that right, Barbara?
Yes.
Okay, and she's going to talk to us about him. She came in, she's a member. She came here a few years ago and sat with us and wanted to know about her daddy. She wanted to get some information. We shared some with her. She took it, she put it into a book. And she's going to come up here and tell you the rest of the story. Let's hear it for Barbara. Can you see this okay? We'll get this up. You want the podium to speak up? All right, we'll put it back. We're very close. Yeah, I'm hard of hearing, that's why.
My wife is going to be jealous.
Help me out here. Look, right next to this. How's that?
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Sommerville, and I'm delighted to be here today to share with you the results of over 3 years of research, interviews, and writing that resulted in this book entitled, I Came Through Swell. It's a memoir about my dad in World War II. He was a bomber pilot of B-17 with the 15th Air Force. I want to thank this organization and many of you for your encouragement and direct assistance in fulfilling this goal. This includes Larry Sagseder, your editor, who so graciously published some excerpts from this book a couple of years ago, which really helped me to get in gear for the long haul of writing it. Thanks, Larry. And Vince Parker, who told me at the first luncheon I ever attended here, when he learned that my dad was a pilot, he said to me, pilots are very special people, very smart people, very sharp guys. And I felt so proud when he said that. So thank you, Vince. Another person I'd like to thank is no longer with us, and that's Dwight Olson. Dwight was in Dad's bomb squad in Lucera, Italy. And from what I can determine, his service overlapped the tail end of my dad's. Although Dwight said he didn't recognize my dad's photo.
Mike, a little closer. Right on your lips.
Oh, okay. Better?
Yes.
Although Dwight said he didn't recognize my dad's photo or his picture, he did say that pilots back then just walked past each other, nodded, or said hi, but they never exchanged names. After a while, it was too painful to lose a friend. Dwight was a sweetheart, and I'm glad that I had the honor of knowing him. And with that, let me thank all of you for your service. In brief, my dad, whose nickname was Speed, he was named after Speed Holman, flew 40 missions with the 301st Bomb Group out of Italy in 1944. He got shot down on his 40th mission over Romania and spent 2 weeks in Bucharest in a POW camp before being released as a result of an armistice between Romania and the Soviet Union. He came home, he entered the reserve, had 10 kids, and spent the rest of his life till his 74th year when he died, flying planes, his first. On my dad's behalf, I would be very honored if you would accept this book into your London library. Dad would be very, very proud to be associated with you. Thank you. Before I donate the book, however, I'd like to read the preface of the book. In the summer of 1981, a B-17 bomber landed at Holman Field in St. Paul. The exhibition of which it was a part included half a dozen or more World War II warbirds and drew crowds of wide-eyed spectators, including my husband, my sister-in-law Susie, and myself. For the exorbitant price of $50, Susie bought a ride on the B-17 Flying Fortress. I startled at the roar of the 4 engines coming to life one at a time. Their giant propellers cluck, cluck, clucked before catching in a furious spin, throwing up dust. I remember the heavy smell and taste of oil when waving nervously but enviously to Susie as the plane taxied away. I wonder how many more times this bucket is going to be able to take off, I said to myself. Then it did take off, incredibly. The immense hulk of olive drab gained altitude as gracefully as a swan and disappeared into the atmosphere. It was odd, I thought, that Dad hadn't come along with us that day. In fact, he seemed to show little interest in seeing the bomber again. I knew he had flown in the war, a fact I was very proud of. His absence puzzled me. But like many veterans of World War II, Dad didn't talk about his experiences. Over the years, we squeezed fragments of information from him, but rarely was it forthcoming. For instance, he told us he flew over Italy. Since the war was with Germany, as a child, I couldn't understand what he was doing so far away from it. It seemed unglamorous. Reality showed itself, however, on the day that Dad chose to tell us about an incident that haunted him throughout his life. The day he unintentionally dropped bombs on a little Italian town and its innocent population. At that moment, he cried in front of us. We kids remember Dad was riveted to the television drama 12 O'Clock High. In the series, which ran from 1964 to 1967, the bristly pilot of a B-17 and his crew flew mission after harrowing mission, engaging in deadly air battles week after week. It must have been cathartic for Dad to watch this program. Every episode contained real black and white film footage of the war. My sister Janet recalls Dad commenting, "It was just like that." Yet when I asked him once what flak was, he told me it was dust in the air. It was like Dad to downplay the real-life horror of war. No doubt he did it to protect himself and protect us and maybe himself. In a sense, all veterans who have faced combat have the same experience. They hide the horrors of war for safety within their psyche. Now and then the crack opens and we peek in, but just enough to know that private memories of terrible things, and perhaps heroic things, reside there. In the summer of 2009, 15 years after my dad's death, I decided as the self-proclaimed family historian that it was time to piece together as much of his war record as possible. I envisioned a summary of 1 or 2 pages that I would compile and distribute to my family members as a Christmas gift. I began by emailing my siblings, asking each of them to tell me what they had of Dad's. After his death and the sale of his house in Roseville, keepsakes of his life spread among his children. I plan to inventory every document, medal, and photograph known. Our brother Jim had the lion's share, which included Dad's handwritten journals and a wood-bound photo album that was filled with pictures and transcribed journal entries and letters my mother put together during Dad's training days in 1942 and 1943. I didn't want to risk having them mailed, so I drove to Superior, Wisconsin on August 18, 2009 to see Jim and his wife, Kathy. like a chip off the old block, I wrote in my journal that weekend, drove to Jim and Kathy's to pick up the woodbound book of Dad's that Mom put together. Jim was making beer. Listened to the Twins game in the car on the way home, sitting in traffic. Twins lost 6-2 to the Hated Tigers. By this time I had my hands full. Along with the journal, Jim sent me a copy of a handwritten mission log Dad wrote overseas, describing his first 27 bombing missions. I'd also written to the National Personnel Link in St. Louis for copies of Dad's military records. My task was to arrange everything in chronological order, a timeline representing the skeleton of Speed's service. But I quickly found that once I filled a spot in the chronological timeline, a curious spot opened next to it that begged investigation. The bare bones themselves seemed to cry out for life. The more I added, the more curiosity led me on. I soon learned that filling these empty spaces with facts was a consuming and at times overwhelming task. In the end, my sleuthing into Dad's past took 3 years and resulted in many more than just 1 or 2 pages. In addition, I felt it was important to add context to Dad's individual missions. This required research, lots and lots of it. Sometimes so engrossing that over a period of 6 hours, for example, the manuscript only grew a tiny paragraph. But besides learning a whole lot more about World War II than I ever thought I would, the thing that captivated me the most was the unexpected discovery of Speed himself. Not only was he a candid diarist and faithful note-taker, but he also approached life as a wide-eyed boy with dreams. I became almost as excited as he did to get his wings, and I couldn't wait to flesh out how the maturing Speed would handle the increasingly difficult challenges he faced overseas as a direct result of his boyhood desire to fly airplanes. In the end, my hope was that the veteran Speed would not hold these fancy dreams against him. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
When was he shot down?
He was shot down on August 18, 1944, over Romania. And he successfully landed. It was his very first parachute jump ever. And he landed in a field, a cultivated field. And he dug a hole and buried his parachute. And when he looked up, he saw Romanian farmers headed his way with pitchforks. And to his astonishment, as soon as he stood up, they raised their hands in surrender. For a moment, he felt safe. That was shortly before the Nazis arrived on the scene just in time to take him prisoner. So they took him into Bucharest with a bunch of other airmen that had landed that day. And he spent 2 weeks in a camp, not sure what his fate would be. Yes.
I have a 2-part question.
Okay.
How did you come by the name of the book and who published it?
Okay. The first answer, the name of the book I came through Swell. That was taken from something that my dad wrote in a letter home after his training and scores of very difficult exams. This was before he ever flew. He really sweated through these exams, and when it was all over with, he wrote a letter home and said, I came through Swell. On to the next step. And so I thought, that's it. That sums up Dad. That's his whole attitude about life. And so that became the title of the book. And what I did was I self-published through a company called CreateSpace. It's owned by Amazon.com. And the process was very easy, I thought, for somebody like me who was a novice. And The nice thing about that is they print on demand, so the book will never run out, never be out of print. And as soon as if somebody wants it, they can order it, and voila, 3 days later they have it in their hands.
How much is the book?
Well, the book lists for $14.99, but it's being discounted to $13. So you can go online and get it. I have a couple more copies here if anybody would like a book. Any other questions?
How was he treated in prison camp? Did he?
Well, hard to say, although it wasn't as bad as many experiences. They did eat. However, he ventured to look into the bottom of a kettle once. They served or serving soup. And he found a skeletalized dog head in the bottom of the soup kettle. So they're having dog soup at least once. He wrote a ballad while he was in prison camp called the Bucharest Tannenbaum. I don't know if I have time to read it, it's pretty short. Would you like to hear it? Tried to keep his spirits up. But it was also, it turned out to be very valuable for my research. It went like this. Across the Adriatic, through spacious skies of blue, there came 1,000 bombers with airmen tried and true. They headed toward the Balkans and straight for Bucharest. Some were hit by fighters, got the rest. And the chorus goes, we landed all safely with parachutes galore, and now we're in a prison camp sweating on the floor. We thought the war was over. We thought with nothing else to do. We thought the war was over, but the bombers still they flew. We heard the roar of engines as they flew high overhead. We heard the bombs a-whistling, and we dove beneath our beds. We lay there a-trembling and praying very hard that they would miss the city and hit the marshalling yards. And the chorus comes in again. And then the third verse is, they took us into Bucharest one bright and sunny day, and here's what the people all started to say. You gangsters, you murderers, you bombed our city fair. You knocked out our marshalling yards, and they're now beyond repair. Does that sound familiar? Marshalling yards were a very common target for the 15th Air Force. And Dad got shot down on his way over to Tbilisi. Oil refineries, another common target of the 15th Air Force, and a very dangerous target. My sisters read this book and they were amazed that Dad even survived. And thank God you all survived. Any other questions? Yes?
What kind of plane did your dad fly?
He flew the B-17, which was also called Flying Fortress. It was a very large plane. It had 10 men on board, 10 crew to fly it. And the main reason for the B-17 was because it could fly very, very high and very, very far and drop bombs on targets very far away.
Good question. Thank you, young man. Any other questions?
Yes,
Did you say the name of the plane? The nose arcs?
we don't know. No.
Some planes didn't have nose arcs. In fact, the majority of them, I think.
He didn't make reference to what the registration number of the plane was in what he wrote down about the mission.
No, never did. But I'll tell you this, they got a factory new B-17 before they headed overseas. They got a factory new B-17 before they headed overseas. They landed at Dakar, Africa, to refuel on their way to Italy, and the plane was sabotaged. Somebody put a bomb on it, and so when they took off to go to Italy, the plane exploded over the airfield. And Dad was the only one who survived that crash. So he lost his original crew. And I think that probably put a damper on Dad's willingness to talk about the war.
Is that in the book, Barbara?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah, yes,
I maybe did not hear it. How long was he a POW?
2 weeks.
How many each would you get out so easy?
Well, because during the time that he was in there, the Russians were getting close to Romania. And so the king of Romania, whose name was Michael, he called his premier, who was really running the show, and said, either sign an armistice with USSR or we're going to take you prisoner. And he refused to sign a surrender armistice. So the king took him prisoner, kicked the Nazis out of his country, formed a new government, and made friends with the Allies, and signed a peace agreement with the USSR, who represented the Allies at that time. And so, in other words, they switched sides. And so, when the Russians finally entered Bucharest, they unlocked the gates, and my dad was set free. And then the B-17s from Italy came back, but they didn't carry any bombs. They came back for the POWs, and there were over 1,000 of these men, and they were all prisoners from the 15th Air Force who had been shot down in 1944. So my dad had a leg injury when his plane was shot down. Flak flew up in between him and the co-pilot and hurt his leg, and so he got to go home when he returned to Lucera. However, they all thought they'd seen a ghost. They never thought they'd see him again. They never saw anybody from his crew again. So that was the second crew that my dad outlived. And besides that, he had one other crash landing, and that was in the mountains somewhere. We don't know many details about it.
A remarkable story, well delivered. We're so proud of you. Let's give her a hand.
I wanted to ask you when he flew his first mission.
That was in April of 1944. I think it was April 2nd or something like that.
Hey, Vince, have you ever sang the 15th Air Force song for her?
We'll get together for that.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate you having me. A pleasure to be here.